And greetings, and welcome to the Melanated Hospice Nurse podcast, where compassion and culture connect. I am Melissa Roland, the host and the Melanated Hospice Nurse, and I just want to tell you so much. Thank you for joining this podcast. But first, before we get started, let me just say a huge thank you to everybody that watched the last podcast, which was the first podcast ever launched for the Melanated Hospice Nurse. So I just want to say thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for your interaction. Thank you for all your words of prayer, your thoughts, your keep going, your kudos, all of those wonderful things, because the Melanated Hospice Nurse is not for me. It is for community. So the fact that community was reaching out and saying, thank you for this space, you all were asking questions, you were sharing the videos, hopefully talking to your friends, talking to your families, talking to yourself about what this entire end-of-life process means, what the death and dying process means, something that we really don't want to think about, but it's something that we are all going to experience. So I just want to say thank you all so much. If you have not had a chance to watch the first episode, please go and watch it now. It was packed full of information because the way we're structuring the information every week is we're going to have a monthly theme, like an umbrella theme that we're going to discuss across the entire month. But every week we're going to hit important topics when it comes to that main topic. So last month, we literally talked about what does hospice mean in our community? What does it mean in the community? What does that mean? And we hit on 4 subtopics or 4 main topics underneath that topic, just to make sure that we're really covering as much information as possible. Sometimes I know that too much information can be an overload when it comes to trying to get others to understand just provoking thought. But I think it's very important that we have these open and honest conversations and dialogue. So what does hospice mean in our community? So one of the topics that we discussed was what hospice actually is. What is hospice? What is it? And we discussed how historically how hospice came to be, and hospice came from the word hospitality, which means to care with compassion. That's what hospice means. So how did it come about in the culture that we're in right now? It came around like the 1960s and 70s, got integrated into the medical system, and now we have hospices all over. But the theory of hospice, because hospice is a theory, the theory of hospice is that a human being should not die in pain, and they definitely should not die alone. That's the theory behind hospice. That's how hospice was actually created, because someone thought along the way that a human being was dying in spaces where they were alone and in pain. So that's the philosophy and the theory behind hospice. So that's one of the topics that we discussed. Another one was, what is comfort versus treatment? What is comfort versus treatment? Because I think sometimes the two get integrated together, and it's hard for us to understand that there is a difference. Because you think that most treatments should be comfortable, right? And you think that comfort care should include treatment. And it does. They both have aspects of one another. But treatment, the whole thought process, is to eradicate the body of a disease or illness. Or if you can't, at least try to manage that disease or illness so the body can still operate at an optimal quality of life. Comfort care is when all of those treatments that we have tried for however long the person wants to try are no longer serving the body. So now we have to get into the mindset where we keep the body as comfortable as possible to make sure that it can still operate in an optimal quality of life, whatever that looks like now that the treatments are no longer effective. So we talked about that, and it's going to be more detail on the podcast, but I just want to make sure that you understand some of the points that we discussed last week when it comes to why or what hospice means in our community. So another point that we discussed was why the misunderstanding of hospice. Why is there such a misunderstanding when it comes to what hospice means, what it does, what the treatment is, what the approach is, what the outcome is. Why is there so much misunderstanding surrounding the word hospice? Well, because we understand that hospice equals death. That's what we generally believe. When we hear the word hospice, that's automatically what we think about. So if we're not in the mindset that we're ready for the dying process, then we are going to approach hospice with misunderstanding, because you're coming into my space when I'm clearly trying to live and all you all do is death. So we tried to talk about those misunderstandings and how we can try to help bust through some of those myths when it comes around a misunderstanding of hospice. Totally get it though. Totally understand that. And then the purpose of hospice. What is the purpose of hospice? That was another topic that we discussed last week. Why does hospice, what is its purpose in my life? What is its purpose in my loved one's life? Why is it something that we can't continue to do in the medical model that we're already in? Why does hospice have to have its own space? What is the purpose of hospice? So these are some of the topics that we discussed on the last podcast, because the overall goal of the Melanated Hospice Nurse is to make sure that we return to community support models of caring for one another, that we return to community supported models where we care for one another. Once we get back to that, because we've come from that, listen, before we were disrupted as a people, the way we care for one another was communal, especially around the dying process, because dying is not medical. Dying is natural. Dying is not medical. Dying is natural. And before, as a collective, as a community, before this 400-year interruption, that's what we did. We cared for one another, and we still continue to do that. It hasn't gone away. We just have to return back to doing it more collectively, because it's encoded in our DNA to care for one another. We can't help it. That's just what we do. So the Melanated Hospice Nurse is here to make sure that we're provoking thought, to say, hey, it's time for us to start caring for one another now. We can do this. No more begging, no more asking for permission. It is time to claim our rightful spot and our space when it comes to helping each other. Because we come from community. And that's what the dying process is. It is communal, it is family, it is love, it is celebration, it is rituals, it is ceremonies, it is all of those things that we connect to. And it's time for us to return to that. But in order to do that, we have to have these very difficult but honest conversations when it comes to the death and dying process. Especially the dying process. The death process, okay. No one can out-funeral us, is what I tell people. And it's not a competition, but we just do it the way we always do it. It is celebratory. We have homegoing ceremonies that are pageantry. But it's the dying process where there's a void of life and celebration and love and community and family. That process, and that's probably one of the most beautiful processes we'll experience in our life. Now, yes, we understand that some of us won't have that option, because death will come suddenly, death will come tragically, death will come unexpectedly. But if we have an opportunity to be present and to be aware of our dying process and to participate in it, then the goal is for that to be love and celebration and family and community. And that's what we're going to do with the Melanated Hospice Nurse. So that was the topic of last week. The umbrella topic for the month is what hospice means in our community. And then we were able to really talk about some key points when it comes to that. This week's topic, I'm excited about it, is why fear surrounds the word hospice. Why does fear surround the word hospice? And I pause because when we hear the word hospice, it's automatically a fear factor associated with it. Now, it doesn't mean frightened, like, oh my gosh, you frightened me, but a fear that comes into place that prevents the conversation of death. As soon as you hear hospice, I don't want to talk about that. It's like, ooh, I don't want to talk about that. Why? Now, we all know that we don't just walk around talking about death every day. I do. I'm the weird one. I love talking about it. I love the space that God has placed me in when it comes to the dying process. Death and dying belongs to the Lord. Life belongs to the Lord. The fact that He put me in this space, I am so grateful for that. And I love talking about it. Anybody that knows me knows that I love talking about death and dying. Yes, it's morbid, but it's our truth and our reality. So why, when we hear the word hospice, do we automatically think fear? And I'm going to tell you why. Because when we hear the word death, automatically there's a fear element that rises up in us. Because we're so disconnected from death. Of course, we've never died before. That's why we're here. But just the thought of it, because we don't think about it, and this culture is something that we don't celebrate. It's not a part of our daily living. So we're so disconnected from death and the dying process that when we hear it, it automatically incites fear. Well, hospice, when you hear it, you automatically think of death. So if death, you think of fear, and hospice, you think of death, then automatically you think of fear when you hear the word hospice. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. If hospice equals death and death equals fear, then hospice equals fear. Because it's clearly associated with death. Hospice is an end-of-life care module. That is what it is. We come into a person's existence when there is technically 6 months to a year left. When the dying process has started, when we know that death is near or on the horizon, when a person has been given a prognosis of less than a year to live. Some hospices are different, but for the most part, 6 months to a year. So that's what we do. That's what hospice is. So of course, people are going to automatically think of fear or feel fear when they hear the word hospice. And one of the biggest things is the fear of death. But the question is, why, have we ever sat down and actually thought about it? Why do we fear death? Why do we fear it? There's countless amount of reasons as to why we fear death. Either A, we've experienced actually watching somebody dying and we thought we don't want that to happen to us. B, it's an automatic disconnection from everything that we're familiar with. C, the unknown. I have no idea what's on the other side. For those of us that have religious structures in our lives and we believe in God and all those wonderful things, we believe that there's a better life on the other side. But even in that space, there's still a fear of death. And the question is why? And until we can honestly answer that question as to why there's a fear of death, then it's going to be very challenging to have these conversations about the dying process, about returning back to community, about community getting involved, because it's going to be something that we don't want to discuss, something that we don't want to be a part of. So that leaves loved ones or individuals dying alone because we can't get past our own fear of the dying process in order to help somebody else. Why do we fear it so much? And how do we get that to change? How do we get it to when we start hearing the word death or talking about our own mortality, that fear is not the first initial emotion that rises up? What if it was something of joy? Or what if it was something of peace, of harmony, of legacy? What if those emotions pulled forward when you heard the word death, as opposed to fear? How would that make you feel? How would that set you free? How would that allow you to go into spaces with other people that are actually dying, and you go there with the opportunity to make sure that they have the peace and the love that they need in order to have that beautiful journey? What if death equaled beautiful journey? When we find out that somebody's pregnant, we don't automatically do fear. We're very happy for them. Oh my God, congratulations, you're pregnant. That is wonderful. When we hear somebody's died, oh my God, oh Lord Jesus, I'm sorry. I hope they're okay. Of course, we know those are natural emotions. We get that. But what if we heard that someone was dying? We went, oh my gosh, let's go celebrate. Let's make sure that they have everything that they need. Yes, there's going to be sadness there because the heart is going to miss that individual. There's going to be a separation there and a void there, all of those things. Yes, we know that. But what if that can be parallel or coupled with joy and love and celebration? That's what we do at funerals. In the beginning, it's sad, but by the end of a funeral, in our community, it is straight celebration. It is straight celebration. We got the repast. We're laughing, we're talking, we're dancing sometimes, all of those things. It ends up being celebratory. What if we did that for the actual dying process? What if we did that for the actual dying process? And how do we get it to where we're literally reprogramming our minds to not automate, and not, even if fear comes up, allow another emotion to come up in addition to fear. Right now, fear is the only primary emotion we have when it comes to the dying process. Imagine if something else can rise up with it. Like, okay, there's fear, but you know what? There's also celebration. There's also joy that that loved one is finally going to be in a place of peace. What if that happened? And then we slowly, over time, start changing that. That's what the Melanated Hospice Nurse is here for. We're going to provoke all of these thoughts. So when we do hear about death, and if we have the opportunity to be with the person as they're transitioning, or we know a family member that has a loved one that is on hospice, and when we go and visit that person, we don't go in there like it's the beginning of the funeral. We literally go in with a sense of joy and peace and celebration. The whole community comes out. You got neighbors coming over, bringing food for the family. You have people volunteering to sit with the loved one so that family member can get a break, or they can go to the grocery store or take a nap. We're laughing and we're sharing stories. Children are running around. They understand what's happening. They see the dying process happening. They embrace that as a part of their life, embrace it as a part of our culture. Straight joy and celebration. Boy, that sounds weird, doesn't it? Of course it does, because we're only used to death. We're only used to fear. I recently had a patient that transitioned. I got there on a Tuesday because I, as a hospice nurse, I work in long-term care facilities, ALFs, independent living facilities, nursing homes. And so I work in that capacity of a person's home. And so, every Tuesday I go to one particular facility, and I had a patient that was, when I got there and I saw that she was actively starting to labor, like the death process had literally started. She was imminent. She was actively transitioning. Up until that point, she was slowly declining into a space where we knew she was going to be actively transitioning. So her body had started to abide by its own rules now, different set of rules when a body is transitioning versus a body that's actively living. So she had stopped eating. She was down to 75 pounds. She was no longer communicating verbally. She was communicating a little bit physically, but nonverbal communication. She was sleeping more. They weren't getting her out of bed anymore because that was part of the plan, was to keep her in bed and let her be comfortable because that was her happy place. She had returned back to the fetal positioning, which we believe is a very comfortable place for people to go back to when they're starting the transitioning process. So when I walked in and saw that, I was like, oop, okay, well, she clearly had some pain. She was in pain prior to the actual transitioning process. But now that she was actually transitioning, she could not swallow the pain pills that we had for her. So we had to convert her over to the liquid morphine. And that's going to be a podcast for a whole different day. I'm excited to talk about that because I definitely want to discuss what that morphine means. We think we know what it means when it comes to, oh, here comes the morphine, they're going to kill him. But we're going to have that conversation. But nonetheless, I was able to order her the morphine because she could no longer swallow effectively pills, and crushing was not an option because she couldn't swallow anything. So we got her the morphine going. She only needed a tiny little bit because she was so tiny herself. So 2 days later, she ended up transitioning. And I got the phone call, 9 o'clock in the morning. I was already visiting another patient. So I got there about 45 minutes later after she had transitioned. And when I got there, the aide that was taking care of her, she was having a very difficult time because she had taken care of this patient for over a year. And she was very connected to her, and she did such a beautiful job taking care of her. So we were able to help, give the aide some support as well too, gave her a big hug, told her thank you so much for all the loving care that she had done for this patient during this time. So I walked into the room and there she was lying in bed. And the first thing I do, if I'm not present when the death actually happens, and I come in afterwards, the first thing I do is I check to see if there was a presence of comfort. And I do that by looking at their face, their body composition, to see at what state they were in when they took their last breath. And she appeared to be very comfortable, and I was very grateful for that. Her face was very relaxed. Her mouth was slightly open, but that's normal. But her face was very relaxed. Her body just looked like she was sleeping. That was a blessing. So then I noticed that the blinds were closed. So I opened the blinds, let some of the light come in. Couldn't open the windows because in a lot of these facilities, the windows don't open, and we understand why. But I noticed that the news was on the television. So I asked the aide, I said, can you do me a favor? Can you please turn that to a station that's playing soft, beautiful melodies, soft, beautiful sounds, like nature sounds? So she did. And I asked her that because when I walked in the room, you can still feel the presence of her aura in the room. You can still feel her there. So out of respect for all aspects of who she is, who she was, I wanted to make sure that the room represented that peace and that serenity, all of those beautiful pieces of who she was, to pay homage and respect to that. So she turned it to the soft sounds. And I know, to some people that's like, well, she's already gone. She was, but you can still feel the essence of who she was still a little present in the room. So as we're doing that, making sure her covers and her blankets were, neatly on top of her, and she had a nightgown on, and they had made sure she was dressed, and she looked very peaceful. Let me just say that, like she was sleeping. So in the meantime, there was a young aide that was in the room. And I say that because she was young, one, and two, this was her first time working in a medical field. So she pulled me aside and she said, I just have to tell you that was absolutely beautiful that you thought to do that. And she said, up until this point, I had a complete and total fear of death. She said, I'd never seen somebody die before. And yes, she's working in the medical field, but she's new in the medical field. She said, this was my first time seeing someone die, and I had no idea that it could be beautiful. She said, I have such a fear of death and dead people. And I told her, I said, I completely understand that, because that's something that's natural in all of us. She said, but what you've done right now and what I'm witnessing, I want my death to be this way. Which I thought was absolutely wonderful. That patient, her last sacrifice that she made was allowing someone else to see the beauty in death. This young lady actually said that was beautiful. And that's how she wants her death to be. So it's like, so how could that be? How can I have an influence on that? Of course, I have no idea how I'm going to die. But if I have that opportunity to be able to have a peaceful death like what I think she did, what I witnessed her having, surrounded by people that loved her, her family couldn't make it, but the staff was right there. So she wasn't alone. The aide actually held her hand until she took her last breath. She described how her last breath was. She took a really deep breath and then a big old exhale. So she was right there with her, surrounded by people that loved her. And the impact that that moment made on another young person's life to say, I no longer fear death. I now want my death to be that way. Because she was able to witness the beauty of the natural aspect of, because death is natural. She was able to witness all aspects of this beautiful soul that was transitioning, coming to this pinnacle and finally being released. The body couldn't hold it anymore. When every aspect of you comes to that pinnacle and the body just has to say, I got to release this now. I have to release it. She was able to witness that. So what I have learned in my 28 years of a nurse, 21 years of almost 21 years of being a hospice nurse, I've learned so much from the patients. I've learned so much from them. And the one thing that I've learned is if I have an opportunity to actively participate in my dying process, I want it to be peaceful. I want to be surrounded by love, the people that love me. I want it to be celebratory. I want it to be singing and dancing. Anybody that knows me knows I love to dance. Why would I want that to stop? I want all of that. I want singing. I want dancing. I want celebration. I want children talking. I want all of those things around me. I want it to be celebrated. I want community. I want it to be a communal celebration. But I also noticed that, I'm gonna tell you this. This is amazing to me. And it's a hospice phenomenon. It's not quite science for how people describe science, but I've seen it enough to not to believe it. I believe this to be a certain thing. Usually when I walk into the room of a brand new hospice patient, and hospice nurses know, sometimes you can just pick up on that personality automatically. Pick up on it. The ones that are very feisty, the ones that are very quiet, and usually you can kind of, especially the feisty ones, the ones who have an opinion about everything, the ones who are not going to take this death thing lying down, as we say. And I usually can ask the families, like, let me guess how she was in her heyday. Let me guess how she was back in her day. And you can kind of describe that personality, and the families are like, yep, 100%, that's mom. And then you have the ones that are very quiet and peaceful, and you can say, you know what? Was she just like, quiet and, not very opinionated and loving and caring and all those wonderful things? And the families are like, yep, that is her. So you can almost see these personalities. And a lot of the times, the death reflects that. Is it a science? If you want to study it, you can if you want to. If a scientist wants to study it, have I seen it enough to know that to be the truth? Yep. Is it always the case? No. But for the most part, you can literally see the death reflect that personality. So when you have clients or you have patients, that are not going to take death lying down. I tell the families, this is going to be an interesting journey. And then you have the ones that kind of just quiet, and you kind of look and say, you know what, more than likely, she'll just probably go in her sleep. So I have seen how the life that they live, their death usually reflects that. So I take that to say this: if that is the case, my prayer is that if I want my death to be loving and caring and peaceful and celebratory and all of those wonderful things, if that's what I desire for myself, then what that does is I'm learning that my death, the day of my death, can influence the life that I'm living now. If I want my death to reflect who I am and how I lived, if that's the thing, then my death right now is teaching me how to live. I go to the day of my death and I visualize it. I visualize it. I visualize it being exactly what I just described. And then I bring it back to where I am right now, and it influences how I move forward toward my death. So the power that I see in my death influencing the life that I'm living now, and then my life influencing my death, that beautiful back and forth, that reciprocated energy back and forth. If that's the case, that is what helps me take the fear out of the word death and replace it with the beauty of the journey. If I am blessed to have the opportunity to actively participate in my dying process, that is what I pray for myself to be. If I believe that my death, when a person walks in that's caring for me, and they can automatically look at me and say, yep, I can tell you exactly the type of life that she lived, not the life that she lived, but the personality of who she was. Because all of everything surrounding me, all the aura of everything that people can see as I'm transitioning is peace and love and harmony, celebration, joy. I'm telling you, when you walk into these rooms, you can see it. I walk into some patients' rooms and you see pain and distress and anxiety. I had a patient, she was so anxious. Oh my goodness, she was so anxious. And the family said she had been that way all their life, but she had learned how to hide it. She had hid it because she lived a certain type of lifestyle. And she didn't want anybody to know that she battled with anxiety silently. Well, guess what happened? When she got to the point, because she had Alzheimer's. When she got to the point where she could no longer hide it, she no longer had the executive thought process to say, okay, I'm in public now, let's put that away. She couldn't do that anymore. So all of that anxiety that she had hidden in her soul, I call it a soul suitcase, when you zip all of that stuff in your soul suitcase. Guess what happens when you come to hospice? That suitcase unzips and everything that you have hidden, all of your life comes out. And now I'm seeing it. And the family they're trying to figure out, what can you do to make mom or dad comfortable? We've tried medications, we've tried we've changed it, we've increased it, we've decreased it, we've tried different combinations of medication, and nothing's working. And that's because it's something deep within them that they never dealt with or couldn't deal with. So you know what that tells me? You better work it out now. Work it out now. Because the day of my death, if you go and you actually visualize what you want that day to look like, allow that day to influence how you live now. Allow it to influence you. And that's one way that we can start working on eradicating fear when it comes to hearing the word hospice. Will we totally eradicate it? Probably not. That's a strong word. But at least we can start intercepting it with other emotions, like joy. So when it comes to why fear surrounds the word hospice, that's one of the aspects of it, is because fear, when you hear death, that equals fear. Another aspect is losing hope. We fear the word hospice because for some of us, it's a loss of hope. We no longer have the hope of getting better. We no longer have the hope of getting better. Because when you're battling an illness or you're battling a sickness or a disease, and you've given it everything that you've got, everything, and a doctor sits across the table from you and says, listen, we have tried everything, all the treatments, and nothing is serving the body to where we can rid the body of the disease or the illness. And we believe that it's probably best to finish your life's journey under the care of hospice. But that person says, no, I want to keep fighting. And the doctors are like, we've tried everything and we've run out of options now. So there goes the hope. And then hospice comes in, and it's like the exclamation point that there is no more hope, because clearly I'm dying because hospice is here. So when you hear the word hospice, it's automatically, for some people, a loss of hope, because I want to keep trying. So usually when I have a patient, especially a new patient, and the conversation leads to this, the first thing I let them know when the conversation comes to this point about hope is, I am not here to take away your hope. If you still want to fight, you have every right to do so. There are certain aspects of that fight that hospice can't be involved in, so we'll have to remove ourselves. But even a thought of hope, even a thought that there's a chance that I might get better, I don't take that away from people. But as the conversation leads itself to this, or lends itself to have a really deep conversation about hope, then we're also able to talk about, okay, the hope of the physical body getting better is probably very slim. But there's other aspects to you that can be healed. You are a multi-layered being. You are more than just your physical. So there's other aspects to you that could possibly be healed. And that's the hope that we hang on to. The hope of the physical body, that's one aspect of you. That hope of getting better may be slim to none. But then there's the hope of the mental part of you getting better and healed. The hope of the psychological part. The hope of the spiritual. The hope of the conscious and the subconscious, and all of those beautiful layers of who you are. We hang on to that hope being healed, because in the dying process and in the death, there could be a lot of healing. Doesn't mean the physical, but because we are, the focus of this matrix that we live in is to really focus on the physical, we forget the other aspects of us. We're multi-layered beings. As it's quoted, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So I try to switch the thought of the loss of hope being the hope of nothing being healed, to breaking it up into different aspects. The physical body may not be healed, but let's talk about the mental. Let's talk about the spiritual. That's why the hospice model, when we come in, there's the nurse, the chaplain, and the psychosocial. Because we know that there are other beautiful parts of you that need to be addressed. It's just so that the dying process has now brought these things forward. When before we don't think about it, it's all physical. Just moving about our life, physical, everything's physical. A little bit of mental, but physical. And then when the dying process starts, you realize, oh my God, there's many layers of me. Yes, so let's focus on the hope of healing. in the other layers of who you are. And for some people, that brings them such a sense of peace. Because what happens in the dying process, especially when you take your last breath, what we see is every one of those layers of you all coming to an agreement. They all come together at one time. And they all agree that it's time to surrender. Surrender everything to what's happening. Surrender to the process, because it's time to go on to the next assignment. We're going to leave this old body behind. And all of those beautiful aspects of you, when they do come together at one time, it is magical and your body can no longer hold it. And that's when you take your last breath and you go on to your next assignment, because that body cannot hold all the realization of all of who you are. The body can't hold that. It's like watching a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. A cocoon cannot hold a butterfly. It's too beautiful. It's too vast. It's brilliant. All of the layers of that butterfly all came to a point. The caterpillar, the cocoon was just parts of the layers. The end result of that butterfly that we see, that's multiple layers of the beauty of that butterfly. The caterpillar and the cocoon were just one layer. And when it gets to all aspects of it, the cocoon has to release it. That's how we visualize that being in hospice. That's why the butterfly is the national symbol for hospice. Because at the time of your last breath, every aspect of you has come to this beautiful point, this pinnacle, and the body can't hold you anymore. It's like the spiritual song, there's a leak in this old building and my soul has got to move. The body can't hold all the beautiful aspects of who you are when they come to one point of realization. It can't. It just can't. And then that's when you take your last breath. I remember I had the pleasure and I had the honor of being with my aunt when she was taking her last breaths. She was in one of our hospice units here, and I was sitting face to face with her. Like, she was laying in the bed and my face was right next to her. And I literally was able to watch through her facial expressions, almost like I could see the journey that she was taking as she was entering, or the stairwell of heaven, as we call it. Because her facial expressions had gone from curiosity, where she was like, am I seeing what I'm seeing? And then it went to this wonder and this awe. And then it went back to the curiosity. And you can just see like she was possibly seeing her loved ones that had gone on before her. Her mother, her father, my dad, like she was seeing it. And you can see how expressive her face was. And then finally, she had this wide look on her face, like she was just, oh my gosh, she couldn't believe it. And then she finally took her last breath. All the aspects of who she was. She was a mighty, mighty powerful woman. So there's no way her body could have held all of that magicalness that I witnessed, and knowing who she was and being able to be there with her as she took her last breath. So we have to focus on the hope in the other aspects of us. So the loss of hope. Another aspect is family resistance. This is a podcast for another time. Family resistance. Family resistance. Probably one of the biggest reasons why there's so much family resistance when a loved one comes onto hospice. And it can either be a family resisting the loved one accepting hospice, or the families themselves resisting hospice for the loved one, or conflict within the family because one person wants hospice and one person doesn't. All of that, we see all of that. But I think one of the biggest reasons why there's so much resistance is because the fear of death. And what we do is we take in our own belief system, our own fear of death when it comes to the dying process, and then we put that on the patient. because we see our own selves laying in that bed. And because we have this fear of death, we believe that that's the way it should be for everybody. Don't even realize that that's what we're doing. So it's sometimes so challenging to take care of the patient because the family, who's this protective field and shield around the patient, have their own thoughts of what death is, their own fears, and they prevent a lot of the care from being done because of their own fear of death. I get it. In the meantime, mom is slowly laboring over here in pain, but the daughter's like, well, no, don't give her pain medicine, give her Tylenol. Don't give her, morphine or whatever it is, give her Tylenol. Tylenol? You want us to give her Tylenol? Of course, because she has this understanding that that's what helps her pain. Not realizing that the rules of the body has changed for mom. She's actively transitioning, not actively living. Therefore, she needs more help and more care when it comes to the dying process. But the family has their fear of death. So because of that reason, mom doesn't get the treatment that she needs to be comfortable, the care that she needs to be comfortable. So being able to help literally think of our own mortality is that in itself will help us care for loved ones that are transitioning. Imagine if you had a person that has such a fear of death, right? You yourself has such a fear of death. And now you're in charge of someone that's dying. Like you're the POA or you're the person that makes the decisions for someone that's dying. Imagine that being the case. And then you walk into the space, you go, oh, no, we don't do this and don't do that. And what about, you don't realize that you're literally, that you're taking your thoughts of your fear of death and you're putting yourself in the bed as if you're actively living. But imagine if you had this beautiful, healthy thought process about death and you're taking care of your mom. And you see that she's actively laboring and dying and transitioning. And you go to the nurse and you say, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that she has anything that she needs to keep her comfortable because the rules of the game have changed now. The rules of the game have changed. And we're going to talk about that in the podcast too, what that means. So she's actively transitioning, but we want to make sure that we're celebrating every aspect of her. We're going to respect the times that she needs for it to be quiet, but we're also going to make sure that she knows that we're here for her. We're celebrating her. The community is here. The loved ones are here, that, she gets whatever medicine she needs to be comfortable, that she has the opportunity to actually enjoy her journey. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine being able to have that thought process for your loved one. Because you have a different thought of death. Fear is not the overriding emotion when it comes to the dying process for you. So you take that same approach to your loved one. Imagine if we were able to do that in community, that we started to shift the way we see the dying process. Imagine how so many of us could die in peace as opposed to dying in suffering or lingering, which are horrible for me to see. It breaks my heart when I see a person that's suffering or lingering in the dying process, simply because those that are in charge of that person, of making decisions for that person, they're bringing their own thoughts of death, their own fears of death as they're actively living, and this person is actively transitioning. So that's the purpose of the Melanated Hospice Nurse, is to have these very honest conversations so we understand the difference between actively living and actively dying. It's two different spaces, two different bodies. The person that's actively dying is not going to get up and go to the grocery store when they're done with the process. You will, but they won't. They're no longer eating. You are, but they aren't. They're speaking. You are, but they aren't. They're sleeping 24 hours a day. You aren't, but they are, because there's two different sets of rules. And that's how the body was designed. There's nothing we can do about that. We can't stop that. So the family bringing their own fear of death can completely play a role in the fear surrounding the word hospice. And then the last part of why does fear surround the word hospice is the emotions. And we've been talking about this all the way through, but the emotions that are activated when you hear the word hospice. I'm gonna tell you why this is hilarious. This part is funny. 9 times out of 10, I forget to take off my hospice jacket, forget to take off my badge. I run into the grocery store, right? Standing in line or standing in an aisle, I guarantee you 100%, somebody's gonna say, oh, you work for hospice? What do you do? I'm a nurse. Oh my gosh, I don't know how you do that. How do you do it? Oh, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do that. It must be hard. Those are the emotions that you hear. Those are the comments that you hear when somebody knows that you work for hospice. Or I could be in a conversation with somebody anywhere, and they'll ask me, what do you do for a living? And I normally say, I'm a nurse. I've learned to say that first. And they go, oh, what kind of nurse are you? I'm a hospice nurse. Oh my gosh. Thank you for what you do, which I get that. I've been called the angel of death, which I don't mind that, as long as the angel part is there, I pray that means that's a good space. Just don't call me the Grim Reaper. That's the one I don't like. I'm not the Grim Reaper. I'm not coming in here just killing people. But those are usually the comments, and you can see the emotional reaction on their face when they find out that you're a hospice nurse, which I say with a lot of, I don't want to say pride, but just I am proud to be that. I'm so thankful. Let me say with thankfulness that God has chosen me to be a hospice nurse. I love it. But I understand that. I know the reaction that's going to come with that. And I'm grateful for all the years of experience to be able to help people navigate through that. I've had conversations with people literally in the grocery store line. And my mother's going to laugh when she hears this because she says, you talk to anybody, anywhere, and I do. But I'm in the grocery store line, and by the time the conversation is over, they have a different perspective of hospice. Just from a 2-minute conversation. Because there was a statistic recently that said that 90% of the population, they all say they want to die at home, they want to die in peace, they want to die, surrounded by their loved ones. But out of that population, probably, I think they said like 25% of the population actually has an active DNR, which means a do not resuscitate. Another conversation for another podcast. And of those, only 12% actually know where the DNR is located. And I'm only saying that because we all want the opportunity to die in peace, in our sleep, or surrounded by loved ones. That's what we say. But what are we doing to make sure that if we have that opportunity, that is actually happening? There are steps that we have to take for that to be. It's not something that death just happens and all of a sudden I'm just peacefully lying here. No, we have to be actively participating in that. We have to be proactive in that. We have to have the DNRs and all those things in place if that's what you choose to have. I'm not telling everybody they have to have one, but if that's what you choose, that's what you choose. But if I want that day to be as peaceful as I imagine, I got to make sure that I'm influencing that now. I can't just hope for it. I have to actively participate in that. I have to be vocal about it. I have to make sure everybody in my family knows that. I want a pure celebration. That's what I would like. I want it to be peaceful. Well, you know what, Melissa? You need to be peaceful now. So those emotions that rise up when you hear the word hospice, those emotions that rise up when you hear the word hospice, that's another reason why fear surrounds the word hospice, because of those emotions. Hospice equals death. Death equals fear. Hospice equals death. Therefore, hospice is fear. So why does fear surround the word hospice? A, the fear of death, right? Losing hope, which is just the toughest one, is losing hope. Family resistance, and the emotions that rise up when you hear the word hospice. But my challenge to you is to literally sit with yourself and actually think about, when you hear the word death, when you hear the word hospice, what automatically happens to you as far as the emotions that arise? And how is it that I could play an active role in my dying process now? Because the dying process can literally help influence how you live now. That's why I think that part of that whole dying process is so beautiful. It can influence how you live right now. Right now. Moving forward, my life shall influence my death. My death is influencing how I live right now. Oh, that's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. How does the word hospice make me feel when I hear it? Why do I have fear surrounding that? And what can I do to try to change that, to try to help shift the narrative, the programming? How do I do that? How can I be an active participant in my dying process? How can I let everybody now know what it is that I want when that time happens? My husband even has the songs that he wants played at his funeral. I won't even tell you what it is because it's hilarious. But we've had these conversations. This is how I want that day to look. When y'all see him in public, ask him the song that he wants played at his funeral. It's hilarious. But these are the conversations that we need to have so we can take away the sting. Oh, death, where is your sting? Where is your sting? The power of visualizing that day and allowing that day to influence how you live right now, so that how you live right now can influence that day. Don't fear it to the point where you don't want to think about it, because it's going to happen. As my father says, that's one appointment you won't miss. You won't be late, you won't be too early, and you cannot call and make another appointment for that one. I need to reschedule. No, you won't be rescheduling this appointment. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. What role can you play in that now? And how can that day influence how you live right now? Let's talk about it. And that's what the Melanated Hospice Nurse podcast is here for, is to make sure that we're having these open and honest conversations when it comes to the dying process. Woo! I could talk about this all day. Love it. I know, call me crazy, but I can. But we need this. We need it. We need this space. So with that being said, next week's podcast. First, I want y'all to watch this one over and over again. Watch the first one, jot down your questions, because you're going to have an opportunity to have those questions addressed. Wherever you see this podcast, Spotify, YouTube, social media pages, wherever you see this podcast, even on the social media pages, we have TikTok, the Melanated Hospice Nurse Facebook, the Melanated Hospice Nurse Instagram. Where you see the Melanated Hospice Nurse, we have the website, the Melanated Hospice Nurse website. So where you see all of this, the Melanated Hospice Nurse, jot your comments in the comment section. Ask your questions, because on Thursdays, we go live on Thursdays called Let's Talk About It Thursdays, where we actually continue the conversation from this week's podcast. So this week's podcast is why does fear surround the word hospice? So write those questions down, comments, the work that you're doing internally to try to shift that fear being the only emotion that comes up when you hear the word hospice, to possibly including something like joy or peace or celebration. So let's interact with that. Put those comments, share this video, Go on the YouTube page, the Melanated Hospice Nurse YouTube page, and subscribe. Go on Spotify. Leave the comments in the comment section so we can address those. If I can't answer them, I'm gonna find somebody that can. But that's what Let's Talk About It does. It opens up this space for have these very tough conversations about the dying process. Because it's going to happen. It's nothing, we can't avoid it. We can't. So next week's topic is going to be one that I cannot wait, because I know this is something that's really kind of been in the forefront a lot lately, is culture, trust, and the healthcare system, and how the deeper layers influence our decisions to come on hospice. Culture, trust, and the healthcare system, and how the deeper layers of those three integrated together influence making a decision for us or a loved one to be on hospice. Culture, trust, and the healthcare system, and how the deeper layers of the intersection of those three aspects completely play a role in us deciding to have hospice care for ourselves or a loved one. So you got to join me for that one. But in the meantime, I have a patient that I see twice a week. Love spending time with her. She's 100 years old. She'll be 101 soon. And our conversations are always amazing. So every time I leave, because we really developed a great relationship, so every time I leave, I cannot say goodbye to her. She says, Melissa, she has an English accent. She says, Melissa, you can't say goodbye. It's goodbye for now, because I need to see you again. So I tell her when I leave her, goodbye for now until we meet again. So remember, may compassion drive you and culture ground you. Until we meet again, goodbye for now.